The modest town of Alekija was alive with activity as the sun slowly dipped behind the distant hills, casting a golden glow over the dusty roads and small houses. The marketplace was bustling with traders calling out their wares, hoping to sell enough before nightfall. Some villagers were hurrying home, while others prepared their stalls for the evening rush, arranging fresh fruits, vegetables, and handcrafted goods under dim lantern lights. In the midst of this lively scene, two schoolgirls, Adanna and Yemi, walked side by side, their school bags bouncing lightly on their backs. Their feet kicked up small clouds of dust as they moved along the well-trodden path, their minds occupied with thoughts of home, food, and the day's lessons. Just as they were about to turn into their street, Adanna's step slowed, and she came to a sudden stop. Her eyes fixed on a young beggar sitting near an old wooden fence, his back resting against it as though the weight of life had pressed him down. His clothes were ragged, his skin pale from hunger, and his hair was unkempt. But there was something striking about him. His face, though weary, held a certain handsomeness that set him apart from the usual beggars they saw on the streets. Adanna's heart ached for him. Unlike other beggars who often shouted or stretched out their hands, this one sat quietly, his gaze lowered as if he had already accepted his fate. She wondered how long he had been there, how many people had passed him by without a second glance. The sight unsettled her. Without thinking twice, she reached into her small school bag, fingers searching for the few naira notes she had left. But just as she pulled out the money, Yemi let out an impatient sigh and grabbed her arm. "Adanna, stop," Yemi said, shaking her head in disapproval. "Do you know how many beggars are on the street? If you start giving money to everyone, you will have nothing left. We barely have enough as it is." Adanna hesitated, her fingers tightening around the small note in her hand. Yemi's words made sense. Their situation was not much better. They had their own struggles, especially with rent due in a few days and no guarantee of when more money would come. If she gave away what little she had, she might regret it later. And yet, something deep inside her refused to let her walk away. She couldn't ignore the way the boy's shoulders slumped, how his hollow eyes stared at the ground, as if hope had long abandoned him. With a deep breath, she ignored Yemi's disapproval, bent down, and placed the money in the beggar's hand. The boy's reaction was unexpected. He didn't immediately grab the money like most beggars would. Instead, he slowly lifted his gaze to meet hers, his dark eyes filled with surprise and something else, something Adanna couldn't quite understand. It was as if he had not expected kindness from anyone. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. Adanna offered him a small smile before rising to her feet. As she turned to walk away, Yemi shook her head in frustration. "You are too soft, Adanna," she muttered under her breath. "One day, people will take advantage of you." Adanna said nothing. She knew Yemi was different from her, tough, cautious, always thinking ahead. But Adanna had always believed in kindness. If the beggar was pretending, that was between him and God. But if he was truly in need, at least, for one moment, she had made his life a little less painful. That night, as Adanna lay in her small room, her mind kept drifting back to the beggar she had met earlier that day. She could not shake the image of his tired, sunken eyes, the way he had looked at her as if he had forgotten what kindness felt like. The streets of Alekija were not easy for anyone, but for someone like him, with nowhere to go and no one to care for him, survival must have been a daily battle. Adanna thought of the little she had, the struggles she and Yemi faced in paying their rent, but somehow, she could not find it in herself to regret what she had done. Instead, she felt a strange sense of peace, knowing that, for at least one moment, she had made someone feel seen. As she turned on her side and pulled the thin blanket over herself, she made up her mind. Tomorrow, she would not just walk past him. She would do something more. The night stretched long, but her decision was firm. The next morning, she woke up early and packed some food in a small plastic bag, some rice and beans from the little they had left in the kitchen. She ignored the gnawing voice in her mind that told her this was reckless. Instead, she held on to the belief that kindness was never wasted. As she made her way to school, her eyes scanned the street for him, hoping he was still there. And there he was, sitting in the same spot against the wooden fence, looking even weaker than the day before. His shoulders were hunched, his arms wrapped around his thin frame as if he were trying to shield himself from the morning cold. His head was bowed, and for a moment, Adanna wondered if he had slept there all night. A lump formed in her throat at the thought. Without hesitation, she approached him, her heart tightening with pity. He did not notice her at first, but when she stepped closer, he slowly lifted his gaze, his tired eyes widening in surprise. Adanna extended the small bag of food toward him. "Here," she said softly. "I brought you something to eat." The beggar stared at the food for a moment as if unsure whether he was dreaming. Then, with trembling hands, he reached out and took it. His fingers curled around the bag carefully, as though he feared it would vanish if he held it too tightly. His lips quivered as he looked up at her, gratitude filling his expression. "Thank you so much," he whispered. "You don't know what this means to me." Adanna watched as he carefully unwrapped the food and began eating. He did not rush, instead, he chewed slowly, savoring every bite as though it were the best meal he had ever had. She sat on a small stone nearby, silently observing him, realizing just how much hunger had weakened him. When he finished, he wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, then turned to Adanna with a small but genuine smile. "My name is Obinna," he said. "I have no family." Adanna felt something deep in her chest tighten. No family. The thought of being completely alone in the world at such a young age was heartbreaking. She imagined what it would feel like to have no home to return to at the end of the day, no parents to worry about her, no friend to talk to. "I'm so sorry, Obinna," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded slowly, his gaze dropping to the ground. "Life has been hard, but I tried to survive." Adanna looked at him and saw not just a beggar but a person, a young man with dreams, struggles, and a heart that had been beaten down by circumstances beyond his control. She knew she could not change everything for him, but in that moment, she made a silent promise to herself she would help him in any way she could, no matter how small. When Adanna got home that evening, she barely had time to take off her shoes before she saw Yemi standing in the middle of their small room, arms crossed tightly over her chest. The look on her face was not new. Adanna had seen it many times before, usually when Yemi was about to give her a long lecture. She sighed and braced herself. "Adanna, our food is finishing fast," Yemi began, her voice sharp with suspicion. "Tell me the truth, are you taking it to that beggar?" Adanna lowered her gaze, not wanting to lie. "Yes, I am," she admitted, her voice steady. Yemi threw her hands in the air in frustration. "Adanna, we are struggling to pay rent, and you are feeding a stranger. You need to stop." Adanna bit her lip. She understood why Yemi was upset. They barely had enough for themselves, yet here she was, giving away their food to someone she had just met. But how could she ignore Obinna's suffering? How could she enjoy her meals knowing he was out there, starving? She clenched her fist at her sides. "I know it's hard, Yemi, but I can't just walk away and pretend I don't see him." Yemi scoffed, shaking her head. "Obinna is not just a stranger. Are you listening to yourself, Adanna? You barely know him. For all you know, he could be pretending just to get your pity. And even if he's really poor, that's not our problem. We have our own struggles." Adanna's chest tightened. She had expected resistance from Yemi, but she had hoped her friend would at least try to understand. "He has no family, Yemi. No one to help him. If we were in his position, Wouldn't we hope for kindness? She asked, her voice quiet but firm. Yemi rolled her eyes. I don't care. I will never suffer because of a beggar. Her words stung, but Adanna refused to argue. Instead, she turned away and began folding the clothes on their small wooden table, trying to push down the ache in her heart. Yemi muttered something under her breath before grabbing her towel and storming into the bathroom. Adanna sighed. She knew Yemi wasn't a bad person, she was just practical. But sometimes, practicality came at the cost of compassion. That night, Adanna lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She could hear Yemi's soft breathing on the other side of the room, but sleep refused to come to her. Her mind was too restless, filled with thoughts of Obinna and the argument she had just had with Yemi. Was she really being foolish? Was Yemi right to be upset? They were struggling themselves, and every bit of food was precious. But when she closed her eyes, all she could see was Obinna's face, his tired eyes, his trembling hands as he accepted the food, the way he looked at her with gratitude as if she had saved his life. She couldn't stop helping him, no matter what Yemi said. But she also knew that she couldn't let her kindness become a burden on their household. There had to be another way. Perhaps she could find a small job or earn some extra money so that she could continue to help Obinna without making things worse for herself and Yemi. As she lay there, she made a silent promise: she would not abandon Obinna, but she would also not let her friendship with Yemi crumble over this. One way or another, she would find a solution. The sun was beginning to set as Adanna made her way toward the spot where she usually found Obinna. The streets were busier than usual, filled with traders shouting out prices and customers haggling for the best deals. Her eyes darted around, scanning for him near the old wooden fence, but the space was empty. Her heart pounded in fear. Where could he be? He was always there at this time, waiting with his quiet smile. A cold sense of panic gripped her chest. Had something happened to him? She swallowed hard and turned to a nearby fruit seller. Please, have you seen the boy who usually sits here? She asked urgently. The woman sighed and shook her head. Some street boys came this afternoon. They beat him up and tried to take his things. I heard someone took him to a clinic down the road. Adanna gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Without a second thought, she turned and ran toward the clinic, her heart hammering in her chest. The thought of Obinna hurt and alone made her eyes sting with tears. She prayed he was okay. When Adanna arrived at the small clinic, she pushed open the wooden door and stepped inside. The air smelled of antiseptic, and a few people sat in the waiting area, some holding small bottles of medicine. Her eyes darted around until she spotted a familiar figure lying on a small bed in the corner. Obinna, she cried, rushing to his side. His arm was wrapped in a bandage, and his face looked pale, but when he saw her, he gave a small, weak smile. Adanna, he said softly. Relief flooded her, and she let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Are you okay? What happened? She asked, her voice shaking. Obinna tried to sit up, but he winced in pain. Some boys attacked me, he said. They wanted the little money I had. Adanna's heart ached. The streets were so cruel. Did they take everything? She whispered. Obinna shook his head. A kind old woman scared them away before they could take much. She's the one who brought me here. Adanna wiped her eyes and turned to the doctor, a middle-aged man with kind eyes. Doctor, will he be okay? She asked anxiously. The doctor nodded reassuringly. He'll be fine, he said. The injuries aren't too deep, but he needs rest. And, young lady, the doctor's voice softened, this boy shouldn't be sleeping on the streets. It's too dangerous. If he stays out there, something worse could happen. Adanna bit her lip. She knew the doctor was right. Today it was a robbery, but what about tomorrow? What if he didn't survive the next attack? She turned back to Obinna, her mind racing. He needed a safe place, but where could he go? She thought about her small home, the tight space she shared with Yemi. Would Yemi even allow it? She knew the answer. Yemi would never agree. But could she just walk away and leave him to fend for himself? She clenched her fist, determination rising within her. No. She had made a promise to herself. She would find a way. She reached for Obinna's good hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. "Don't worry," she said firmly. "I won't let anything happen to you." She had no idea how she would convince Yemi, but one thing was certain: Obinna would not spend another night on the streets. That night, Adanna lay awake, staring at the ceiling of her small room. The tiny space felt even smaller as her thoughts raced. The doctor's words echoed in her head: if he stays out there, something worse could happen. She had to make a choice, and she already knew what it would be. She would bring Obinna home. He couldn't survive on the streets any longer, not with thieves lurking around every corner. But she also knew what this meant. Yemi would never agree. Adanna sighed, turning to the side, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Would Yemi understand? Would she accept it? Adanna knew the answer before she even asked herself the question. No, Yemi wouldn't agree. But did that matter? She had already made up her mind. The next morning, before going to school, she passed by the clinic. Obinna was sitting up on the bed, looking much better than the day before. His eyes lit up when he saw her. "You came back," he said with a small smile. Adanna took a deep breath, preparing herself for what she was about to say. "Obinna, I want you to come home with me." Obinna's smile faded as he blinked at her in shock. "Home," he repeated slowly. Adanna nodded firmly. "Yes. You can't stay on the streets anymore. It's not safe for you." Obinna looked down, his hands gripping the thin hospital blanket. "But your friend won't agree. I don't want to cause trouble between you two." Adanna sighed. "Yemi will be angry, but I don't care anymore. She doesn't understand, but I do. You don't have anywhere else to go, and I won't stand by and do nothing while you suffer." Obinna hesitated, clearly torn. He had spent so long being rejected that the idea of someone willingly bringing him into their home felt unreal. "I don't want to be a burden, Adanna," he said quietly. She shook her head. "You won't be. We'll figure things out. For now, I just want you to have a safe place to stay." Obinna studied her for a long moment, as if trying to see if she truly meant it. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Thank you, Adanna," he said softly. For the first time in a long while, hope flickered in his heart. That evening, as Adanna stepped into the small apartment with Obinna, she braced herself for the storm that was about to come. And it came fast. Yemi, who had been sitting on the floor reading a magazine, looked up, and her eyes widened in horror. "No! No! No!" she shouted, jumping to her feet. "Adanna, what is he doing here?" Adanna met her gaze without fear. "He's staying with us," she said firmly. Yemi's face twisted in rage. "Are you insane? I will not live in the same house as a beggar." She pointed a shaking finger at Obinna, who stood quietly, unsure of what to do. "Get out. Both of you." Adanna clenched her fist. "No, Yemi. This is my decision. If you don't like it, then that's your problem." Yemi scoffed, shaking her head. "Unbelievable. You're ruining your own life for some street boy." But Adanna didn't back down. She turned to Obinna. "Come inside," she said gently. With hesitation, he stepped in. That night, for the first time in years, Obinna slept in a warm and safe place, while Adanna lay awake, knowing she had just changed both of their lives forever. The morning was calm, with the soft rustling of leaves outside the small apartment. The air smelled of the freshly cooked breakfast Adanna had just prepared, and the gentle hum of the village filled the space with familiarity. But for Obinna, that morning was different. A simple letter had arrived, carried by an old messenger who left before he could ask any questions. As he unfolded the paper, his hands trembled. His breath became uneven as his eyes darted over the words, each sentence shaking him to his core. Adanna, who had been setting the table, noticed his sudden change. His face had lost all color, his fingers gripping the letter so tightly that it crumpled in his hands. She had never seen him like this before. There was always a sadness in his eyes, a quiet pain he never spoke about, but now, it was something more. It was as if the ground beneath him had disappeared, and he was falling into a past he had long tried to forget. He exhaled slowly, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and relief. The truth could no longer remain hidden, it was time to tell his story. As he gathered his thoughts, memories long buried came rushing back, each one as sharp as a knife. He was not always a beggar. He had once worn robes of the finest silk, eaten from golden plates, and lived in a palace so grand that its beauty could steal the breath of anyone who laid eyes on it. He had once been a prince, the only son of a powerful king and queen who ruled a kingdom that stretched far and wide. But war had a cruel way of changing everything. His peaceful home had been turned into a battlefield overnight. Enemies stormed the kingdom, torches lighting up the night sky as the walls of the palace crumbled. His parents, desperate to protect their only child, had sent him away in the dead of night. With nothing but a small patch of coins and a command to run, he had been forced to leave behind everything he had ever known. His heart had shattered as he watched his homeland disappear behind him, knowing he might never return. The journey that followed was brutal, days of hunger, months of wandering, and years of hiding. With each passing day, his royal identity faded, swallowed by the struggle to survive. Eventually, he had become just another forgotten face on the streets, a beggar to those who pass him by. As he finished speaking, the silence in the room grew heavy. Adanna sat frozen, struggling to process what she had just heard. She had believed she was helping a poor beggar, offering kindness to someone who had lost everything. But now, she realized she had been unknowingly helping a lost prince. The weight of his story settled on her chest, making her heart ache for all he had endured. She thought about the days she had spent bringing him food, the nights he had slept on the cold ground, and the fear he must have felt every time he closed his eyes. How cruel life had been to him, stripping him of his birthright and forcing him to suffer alone. But despite it all, he had survived. He had not given up. He had carried his secret, his pain, and his broken past, and yet he had still found a way to move forward. Adanna realized then that the boy she had met on the street was not just a beggar or a prince, he was a fighter. And now, with his past uncovered, his future was about to change forever. The letter Obinna received carried more than just words, it carried the weight of his entire past and the key to his future. It was written by an old royal guard who had served his family before the war. The message was brief but powerful. His family's kingdom had been restored, and they were searching for him. The land that was once lost had been reclaimed, and the people who had lived in fear under the rule of enemies could now breathe freely again. His heart pounded as he reread the letter, his mind racing with memories of the palace, his parents, and the life he had left behind. The boy who had once been forced to run now had a chance to return, not as a lost beggar, but as a prince, the rightful heir to his father's throne. It felt like a dream, one he had never dared to hope for. The street boy, the one who had begged for scraps and slept in the cold, was being called home. His name had not been forgotten, and his place in the world had been waiting for him all along. As he held the letter tightly, he thought about how different his life could have been if Adanna had not stopped to help him. Without her kindness, he might have remained on the streets, believing that he was nothing more than a forgotten soul. But because of her, he had survived. She had saved him in ways he could never fully explain, giving him food when he had none, shelter when he had nowhere to sleep, and, most importantly, hope when he had lost all reason to believe in a future. Now, he had the chance to reclaim his destiny, but he knew he could not do it alone. The battles he had faced had shaped him into someone stronger, but they had also shown him the importance of having someone by his side. He had met many people in his time of struggle, but none had a heart as pure as Adanna's. She was not just someone who had helped him, she was someone who had changed his life forever. He could not imagine stepping into his new life without her there. He knew that Adanna would never see herself as someone important. To her, she was just an ordinary girl who had done what was right. But to him, she was extraordinary. She was kind, brave, and selfless, everything that a true leader needed to be. She had risked her comfort for the sake of a stranger, proving that her heart was stronger than any riches or title. He had met many people who value wealth and power above all else, but Adanna had given when she had nothing to spare, expecting nothing in return. That was the kind of person he needed by his side. His kingdom was waiting, but he could not go back alone. He had made his decision, he would ask Adanna to come with him. Whether she saw herself as just an ordinary girl or not, to him, she was far more than that. She was the person who had changed his life, and now, he wanted her to be part of his future. The grand gate of the palace swung open, revealing a sight that Adanna had never imagined in her wildest dreams. The palace stood tall, its golden rooftops gleaming under the setting sun, its walls reflecting a history of strength and resilience. The courtyard was filled with people, royal guards in shining armor, nobles in their elegant robes, and servants who had lined up to witness the long-lost prince's return. Obinna stepped forward hesitantly, his heart racing with anticipation. It had been years since he last stood on this sacred ground, and now, he was no longer a child fleeing for safety but a man returning to claim his rightful place. The moment his parents laid eyes on him, they ran to him with tears streaming down their faces. His mother, the queen, held him tightly, as though she feared losing him again. His father, the king, though usually a man of few words, embraced him with pride. They had waited for this moment for so long, and now, their son had returned. Adanna stood back, watching the emotional reunion unfold, unable to believe that this was the same Obinna she had met on the streets. Though she had always known Obinna was special, standing in the palace now made everything feel surreal. She had once shared food with him under the open sky, believing he was just a beggar with nowhere to go. And yet, here she was, standing in a palace filled with marble floors, grand staircases, and chandeliers that sparkled like the stars. The royal family treated her with immense kindness and respect, making her feel welcome despite the difference in status. She was given a beautiful room in the palace, her own maidservants, and fine clothes fit for a noblewoman. But no amount of luxury could change who she was. She remained the same humble girl who had helped a stranger in need. She walked the palace grounds every evening, marveling at how much her life had changed in such a short time. And yet, despite the grandeur, she still cherished the quiet moments, the memories of sitting with Obinna, talking about dreams and survival, long before she knew who he truly was. She had never helped him for wealth or recognition, she had helped him because it was the right thing to do. One evening, as the sky turned deep orange, Obinna stood before her, his eyes filled with emotions he could no longer hide. He had regained his title, his kingdom, and his family, but there was still one thing missing, someone to rule beside him. He looked at Adanna, the girl who had changed his life, and knew there was no one else he could ever want by his side. He asked her to stay, not as a guest, not as a servant of the kingdom, but as his queen. Adanna's heart pounded at his words. She had never dreamed of such a life. She had never longed for riches, palaces, or crowns. But as she looked into Obinna's eyes, she saw the same boy she had met on the streets, the same boy she had shared her food with, the same boy she had trusted and cared for without expecting anything in return. And that was all that mattered. She did not love him for his title or his wealth, she loved him for his heart. And so, she nodded with certainty, accepting the life that fate had placed before her. With a smile, she whispered her answer, sealing a new beginning not just for Obinna, but for herself as well. The news of Prince Obinna's wedding spread like wildfire throughout the kingdom. People whispered in awe about the girl who had once shared her food with a beggar, unaware that she had been feeding a prince. Many who had once pitied Adanna now admired her, for she had risen from an ordinary village girl to the future queen. The market squares, town halls, and villages buzzed with excitement. Every corner of the land prepared for the grand event, and the royal palace was filled with the hustle and bustle of servants decorating the halls with gold and white fabrics, fragrant flowers, and shimmering lanterns. Invitations had been sent far and wide, and nobles, rulers, and dignitaries from neighboring kingdoms traveled great distances to witness the union. The kingdom had not seen a wedding of this grandeur in generations. The roads leading to the palace were lined with villagers eager to catch a glimpse of their prince and his bride. They cheered for Adanna, their voices filled with pride, as she rode past them in a beautifully adorned carriage. She had earned their respect, not because of the crown she would soon wear, but because of the heart she had always carried. Inside the palace, Adanna was being prepared for the ceremony. She stood in front of a large mirror, dressed in an elegant gown of flowing silk, embroidered with gold threads. A delicate crown, gifted to her by the queen, sat on her head, shining as bright as the kindness that had led her to this day. The room was filled with royal maidens attending to her, adjusting her jewelry, ensuring every detail was perfect. Yet, despite all the grandeur, Adanna felt a deep sense of peace within her heart. She had never desired riches or royalty, but she had followed her heart, and it had led her to love. The doors to the grand hall slowly opened, revealing a long aisle adorned with white petals. As she stepped forward, the crowd gasped in admiration. The sight of her was breathtaking. Her confidence radiated with every step, her smile filled with warmth and sincerity. At the end of the aisle stood Obinna, waiting for her. He was dressed in royal robes, his eyes filled with admiration, gratitude, and love. He had regained everything he lost, his family, his home, his title, but Adanna was the greatest gift of all. As the ceremony began, the kingdom held its breath. The high priest, standing before them, blessed their union in the presence of the royal court and thousands of witnesses. The sun streamed through the grand windows, casting golden light upon them, as though nature itself rejoiced. When the moment arrived, Adanna and Obinna turned to face each other. Their journey had been one of trials and fate, of chance and destiny. Obinna took Adanna's hands in his heart full of emotions that words could never fully capture. She had not just saved his life, she had restored his faith in people, in love, in kindness. He looked at her with deep reverence, knowing she was the queen he had always needed. As they exchanged vows, sealing their promise before the kingdom, the crowd erupted in cheers. Their love story had begun in the most unlikely of places, yet here they were, standing at the altar as king and queen. Fireworks lit up the sky, drums echoed in celebration, and the kingdom rejoiced. The wedding of the century was not just a union of two hearts but a testament to the power of kindness, love, and destiny. The kingdom rejoiced, and Adanna ruled with wisdom and love. She never changed, always remembering where she came from. The lesson of this story is simple: kindness can open doors you never imagined. When you help others without expecting anything in return, the universe rewards you in ways you cannot foresee. Thanks for watching. Do not miss our next suspense-filled story. Click the subscribe button and turn on notification to get updates when we upload our next story.